but I can't accept her statements as fact because they're not empirically provable. With that said, you can believe me or not, but what I'm about to say is something that even I have a lot of trouble disbelieving. I can't say I've had any supernatural experiences in my life, but there are several things that happened when I was quite young that I simply can't explain. At around 18 months old, I had either a memory or a very vivid imagination of my life. Before birth, I was floating up in the sky with no land in any direction. In front of me was a kindly middle-aged Native American man wearing a plain white robe. He asked me if I was ready, and when I said yes, I somehow descended and experienced my own birth. I know this all sounds crazy, and I guess it could all be chalked up to me having a dream. But as I got older, things got weirder. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I started getting very distinct mental images of something extremely disturbing. What I saw was a tanned, mummified-looking, emaciated, dead face. The eyes were glassy, but somehow horribly alive, and the lips and nose were shrunken. The creepiest thing about the face was the too wide smile and a full set of very white teeth. When I was 9 or 10, I read for the first time about an expedition in Antarctica where several ill-fated members of an expeditionary group died and were left behind. Their bodies were recovered in the 20th century, and the article I was reading had images of them. I had never seen a frozen body before, but as soon as I saw those pictures, I immediately correlated what I was reading with the thing I saw in those mental images earlier in my life. From that point onwards, I started having almost real waking visions of something that is basically my worst nightmare. It's hard to explain more than just in my mind's eye, and yet not exactly as if they were actually in front of me. It was an 8 or 9 foot tall frozen corpse, completely naked, with long arms and legs. It had the same face as the thing I had seen before, with shrunken features. Only now it had a full body, and that was just as emaciated and mummified as the head and neck were. I only ever saw it on cloudy days in the late fall or winter, and always when it was between me and a window, so it was sort of backlit. It never made any motion to do anything. It just stared down at me with that horrible grin. In high school, I finally learned what this thing was, the Wendy. For those of you who don't know, it's a mythical spirit creature, an Algonquian legend. I was born in Connecticut and have about 1% Native American blood in me from 400 years ago. My first traceable ancestors in America came over shortly after the Mayflower, and one of them married a Native American woman. According to legend, the Wendy was an evil spirit associated with starvation, the winter, and cannibalism. It either lured desperate people into eating their fellow humans during the winter, or possessed those who did resort to cannibalism. There are various stories about how the Wendy looked, but most agree that it looks like a frozen corpse generally taller than a human. And no, it doesn't have antlers like all those pictures you find via Google search. It can reportedly mimic human voices to lure the unwary into ambushes. Here's the thing, I experienced this before I even identified what the creature was, or knew anything about the legends. Only after almost a decade of initially seeing the Wendy did I come across the description of what it looked like. I've done some further research, and all of the information I found from various sources all concurs with what I saw. So, I am remotely linked to the Native Americans with whom the legend originated. I've always had a deathly fear of dead bodies, especially mummified-looking ones, and I saw a creature from their stories long before I learned what I saw matched the traditional descriptions perfectly. I was, and still am, skeptical, but even I can't ignore these coincidences. I'm also a Christian, and therefore I'm quite wary of claims regarding ghosts or the supernatural. But even so, this thing has stuck with me for years. I saw it earlier today, which is why I'm relaying this. Does anyone have any insight? I've considered seeking out a highly knowledgeable Algonquin person, so I can figure out what to do. But I'm torn because I also have some reservations about that from a religious perspective. I promise this post is sincere. It sounds pretty fantastical, even to me. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just my imagination. If the company I worked for found out I was writing this, I'd be canned immediately, so the who and where is intentionally vague. My name's T, and I deliver pizzas in a small rural town in northern Canada. The town I deliver in consists of about 25,000 people spread out along the foothills of a large mountain range. Many people who live here are farmers and loggers and shit like that. We have a small college here too, so there's a few students from out of town living here as well. Unlike most delivery companies, the one that I work for allows people outside of the city limits order a pizza up to 50 kilometers away from our location. Our company's like that because many of the town's residents actually live out of the city limits in the foothills where the farms are. If you're 50 kilometers away, it'll cost an extra $20 that might seem outrageously high. But believe me, people really like their fucking pizza. Obviously, this causes me and other drivers to be gone for long periods of time on deliveries to top it off. We're open until 5 a.m. every night. This combination of variables has caused me to witness Sam be part of some really fucked up and creepy shit during my several years working here. I don't know if other drivers in different parts of the world have the same issues, but here in northern Canada, there's a lot of really creepy and questionable stuff going on. I don't consider myself superstitious in any way, but some of the things I see I can't explain before anyone calls me out and says, I'm the only one experiencing these things. I'm not the drivers, and I regularly hit the bar after shifts, and some of them are really messed up over some of the stuff they've seen. I know a guy who keeps a lamp on inside of his car at night because he's so terrified of the dark after something happened to him that he won't tell anyone about. Several months ago, I want to say December, I was working a clue shift. My delivery sector was mostly the outskirts of town. Along the foothills and further north, being December in Canada, there was about 6 inches of fresh snow, and only the highways and artery roads were plowed properly. Driving the rest of the roads would be a death wish if you didn't have the right gear and experience. Luckily for me, I have an AWD car, studded tires and chains, in case things go really south, and I'm one of the more senior drivers. Being one of the few people with an all-wheels drive car, I was requested to take another pizza to the edge of our delivery range. Since the weather was so shinty, I called the number on my slip to confirm the address and to check that they still wanted the pizza. Getting the okay from what seemed like a cheery old lady, I set out down the highway. Just after I left the city limits, I noticed something alarming. All of the lights, including the street lights, were out, assuming a power outage due to the storm. I give my boss a call to confirm it. He confirmed that it was indeed a sector-wide power outage. I attempt to give the lady I'm delivering to a call. Hey, this is your delivery driver. I'm noticing there's a power outage and was wondering if you still wanted the pizza. Despite these terrible conditions, she said that she did and that she had a backup generator power in her house, so it'd be hard to miss, knowing that I had hooked a substantial tip. I put my blinkered on and continued back down the highway. One thing you need to understand is just how dark it was, with it being later than midnight and not a single light on. The only things illuminating my way were my subpar headlights. On top of that, it was snowing quite heavily for reference. My field of vision looked exactly like this. If my car were to die or my headlights were to go out, I'd be completely fucked. About 10 kilometers down what I can only assume was a dirt road underneath the mountains of snow. In the middle of nowhere, I came across a car in the middle of the road with its hazards on. The car was diagonal across the road and from its tracks. I could tell it, tried to stop suddenly and lost control. moving about 20 meters from the car. I couldn't see any signs of life and noticed that the driver's side door was swung open and snow was piling inside the car. What alarmed me the most was what looked like blood on the inside of the window and all over the steering wheel as well. Upon clearing the snow from inside the car, it was obvious that there was a pretty brutal accident here, as there was blood all over the driver's side. My mediocre first aid training kicked in, and my first response was to call 911 and get an ambulance out here, pulling out my cell phone. The most cliché thing happened. There was no fucking service. Obviously, there's no fucking cell service. I thought to myself, I'm out in the bookies. At this point, I'd completely forgotten about the delivery and was pretty intent on helping whoever fucked up out here in the bookies. The chance of another car coming by all the way out here this late was slim to none, so this was on me. I managed to figure out a couple of things. Firstly, the person obviously hit something really, really big, like a moose or a large bear. The front of his car was almost entirely caved in, and both his front wheels were going in opposite directions. No way this thing was going anywhere. Drawing on past experience, I actually couldn't think of any animal that would do that much damage to a car like that. Secondly, after seeing a small trail of blood leading up the road, I assumed he probably went walking for help. This was where I made my first mistake. I followed the trail of blood on foot. Wanting to play the hero, I bundled up and set out into the storm with a small LED flashlight. I was concerned with whoever had injured themselves in this accident and getting to them safely. After about 5 minutes of walking, I realized that I fused up majorly as a singular thought went through my mind. What if whatever the driver hit is still out here? Judging by how big the impact on the car was, I can only assume that it was a grizzly bear or something unknown. Much larger, dealing with a wounded animal in the middle of winter was something my pay grade didn't cover. After my moment of clarity, I decided my best bet was to get back in my car and get back to cell service to call 911. Not even after I had taken 10 steps back towards my car. I heard what sounded like an entire tree being torn from the ground. The noise was absolutely deafening and threw me into a wild panic. I started sprinting back to my car, but kept getting slowed down by the fact that my legs wouldn't coordinate with each other. After sprinting about 5 steps, I ate shit hard. I tripped face first into a snowbank and just laid there. Just as I was about to get up again, I heard it. I heard what sounded like heavy breathing coming from just out of my visual range. The noise was coming from where the accident happened and where my car was. At this point, something felt terribly wrong. That labored breathing sounded more animal than human, and was far too loud for any human to make. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing got louder until suddenly I saw whatever was making that terrible noise. It had to be standing a minimum of 8 feet tall. Yeah, it was fucking standing. It was running on 2 feet, but every couple of steps it would stumble and start running like a bear on 4 legs. It had sort of a loping gait, but then it would get back up on 2 feet and start running like a human. It was almost entirely covered in thick white fur and would have been almost impossible to spot had it not been covered in blood. Whether or not that was its blood or the driver of the car. I never stuck around to find out whatever that thing was. It was too distracted to see me and sprinted right past me down the middle of the road, still breathing as heavy as ever. After what I thought was a solid 10 minutes, I forced myself out of the snowbank and sprinted back to my car. When I got back to the vehicle, all 4 of my doors were wide open and the pizza boxes were strewn all over the road. Not even thinking about the pizza or the delivery. I drove straight to the police station to report what happened. Officially, the police report states that the driver of the car collided with a large bear and that the bear dragged him off into the woods and devoured him. They never found his body, but did find what appeared to be a portion of his spine almost 80 kilometers from where the accident happened. It was a really big thing in our town. People spent weeks searching for him. Whatever that thing was that the driver hit, it's still out there. If you guys enjoyed this, I could probably get together with some of the other drivers and get some stories out of them over a few brews. If not, I have a few other really fucked up stories to share with you guys. If you want either way, tip your delivery. Drivers. A few days ago, I was walking around the land near my home. It's a big field with 2 large hills and a plateau on top of both of them. It was around dusk, so the sun had just set, but the moon wasn't out yet. Upon walking between the valley of sorts between the 2 hills, I saw something peculiar, a white, featureless human head about 200 feet away. It was about 4 feet off the ground, and from what I could tell, it was pacing back and forth. It sounded like a horse when it walked, and when I went to pull out my flashlight, it growled at me. I immediately went home, deciding I didn't want anything to do with it that night. Today, a friend came over, so we decided to investigate. During the daylight hours, we couldn't really find anything conclusive, but we did find some creepy things. I'll show you them in a moment. We heard howling and laughter like that of a child. I thought it sounded like the Skull Kid. To be honest, the birds just weren't flying right, and something kept watching us from the trees again. We heard the sound of hooks. My friend said that she could smell sulfur, but I couldn't smell anything, although the inside of my nose was burning. Here are some photos of what we found in the area. The first 3 look like some form of graves, and this last one, well, I don't really know, but they were all over the place, and some looked as if they had been burned. If you guys could help me out by telling me what you think this was, I'd really appreciate it. It was a late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent into the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. My girlfriend and I were hiking in a remote area, far from the clamor of civilization. The trail was narrow, flanked by towering trees with dense undergrowth that swallowed the light and muffled the world around us. There was something serene about the isolation, at least at first. As we walked, the silence of the woods became unnerving. No chirping birds, no rustling squirrels, just us. Then we heard it. A faint rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch. At first, we dismissed it as wildlife, perhaps a deer moving through the underbrush. But the noises grew distinct, deliberate, as though something, or someone, was pacing us. We stopped abruptly, our boots crunching on the gravel path. The sound stopped too, a perfect, eerie mimicry. I gestured for us to move again, and sure enough, the noises resumed, keeping step with us. It wasn't random anymore. Whatever it was deliberate. It felt intelligent. I whispered to my girlfriend to stay calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. It mirrored my own. Testing our unseen follower, I stopped again, this time holding my breath. Silence. My girlfriend clutched my arm, her grip tight with fear. Then, without warning, I made a decision that looking back could have easily gone horribly wrong. I told her to stay on the trail while I investigated. Reluctantly, she nodded, her eyes wide with worry. I stepped off the path, the ground soft and uneven underfoot. The rustling grew louder as I moved closer, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. Every step seemed amplified in the quiet forest. Then, I saw it, about 30 feet ahead, partially obscured by a tree. At first, I couldn't process what I was looking at. It was humanoid in shape, but grotesquely tall and thin, its pale skin almost glowing in the dim light. Its form was skeletal, like something out of a nightmare. It didn't move at first, and neither did I. We were locked in a silent, terrifying standoff. Then, it darted behind the tree with a speed that defied logic. In a split second, it was gone, retreating deeper into the woods. I stood frozen, paralyzed by what I'd just seen. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what couldn't be rationalized. It wasn't human. Not entirely. The way it moved, the way it watched, it wasn't right. After what felt like an eternity but was likely just a minute, I forced myself to move, retreating back to the trail where my girlfriend waited. Her face was pale, her expression a mix of relief and terror when she saw me. I didn't tell her everything I saw, not right then. I just said we needed to keep moving and get back to the car. The rest of the hike was a blur. The noises stopped as suddenly as they'd begun, but the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every gust of wind felt like a presence brushing past us. When we finally reached the safety of our car, I locked the doors and sat there, trembling. My girlfriend asked me again what I saw, and this time, I told her everything. She was silent for a long time, then whispered, "Let's never come back here." I've thought about that day countless times since. I've tried to explain it away, a trick of the light, an animal I didn't recognize, but nothing fits. What I saw wasn't natural. It wasn't supposed to be there. And to this day, it makes me realize that there are things in this world we cannot explain. Things lurking just out of sight, waiting to remind us how small and vulnerable we truly are.